Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Information's TITV. My name is Rocket Drew. It is Friday, May 1st, and we have a great show lined up for you today. First up, we're going to break down Apple's latest earnings with an analyst from UBS. I'll also chat with the popular author of the Marcus on AI Substack, Gary Marcus himself, about the Musk Altman trial, why OpenAI's models are obsessed with goblins, and the perils of coding agents. We'll wrap up with some exclusive reporting from The Information about Shopify's big push into financial services. It's going to be a great show, so let's get into it. Apple's iPhone business rebounded in the March quarter, growing nearly 22% from a year earlier. Revenue in China also rebounded, jumping 28% for the quarter. Investors are now looking ahead to a major leadership transition, with longtime executive John Ternus set to take over as CEO later this year. Here to discuss all those results is David Vogt, a US IT hardware analyst at UBS. Welcome on the show, David. So,
Great. Thanks
what
for having me,
was your
Rocket.
absolute biggest takeaway from the earnings call?
Yeah, I think two things. One, the iPhone portfolio and the Mac portfolio has been incredibly resilient in the face of economic challenges across the globe. So I think that surprised investors to the upside, both on iPhone demand and Mac demand. And the second most important point is the company generated relatively strong profitability, again, despite sort of the macro considerations of higher memory costs across the globe. So net, a very positive quarter for the company, and we would expect more to continue as we go into June.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the iPhones. So, there were a few years of slow growth there, and then the last couple quarters, we've seen some renewed growth. Why is demand so high lately?
Yeah, I think demand is being driven by two factors. One, a revamped portfolio. So the specifications of the iPhone 17 have clearly resonated with consumers. Better camera, better battery life, and other sort of features that I think customers want. The second consideration, I think, is really a little bit more company specific. Their ability to get plenty of components when needed. So unlike other companies that are struggling to get memory, Apple's winning in market share, and we would expect that to continue. So it's a combination of company specific development as well as macro challenges for other competitors.
And how is it that they're winning in memory? What set them up to do that?
Yeah, if you look over the last, decade or so, Apple has built an incredibly resilient supply chain. They're one of the leaders in terms of the Southeast Asia supply chain, North American supply chain. So their expertise that they've built up over a long period of time has allowed them to really have strong relationships with the big memory providers. And quite frankly, they've just been at it longer and they're better at it than most of their peers, including Samsung.
Got it. But Apple says it's still working through some supply constraints for Macs. So, what is that telling us about demand and their supply chain?
Yeah, so Macs actually it's a little bit of a different story. The demand for Macs have been incredibly strong, given by the Neo and the Mac Mini. So the supply chains are really a function of the company not really preparing for the overwhelming strength that they've seen. So it's not a supply chain resiliency issue. It's more of basically basically demand environment that was much stronger than anyone had anticipated. On iPhones, it's more memory and advanced node considerations, but Macs, the strength is just really the issue at this point.
Interesting. What about in terms of China? I think that market has been a little bit of a concern in the past, but we saw some solid growth this quarter. Is there a turnaround that's happening there?
Yeah, in China, Apple has done a really good job of winning back share, particularly in iPhone. This quarter, China, the greater China area grew revenue 28%. What you've seen in that market is, again, the customer proposition has really resonated. The product's good, the pricing is appropriate for the market, and they've taken back some share that they've lost to the local Chinese vendors. We would expect that to continue as well, given the memory dynamics that we talked about earlier.
I see. On the earnings, we also heard a little bit about this net cash neutral target that they have. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it's a good question. So over the last decade or so, the companies had a focus on reducing their cash balance and really using that to drive shareholder value in the form of buybacks. We hit that sort of net cash neutral break even point effectively this quarter. So what the company I think is going to do going forward is really still be aggressive on buybacks, but really giving themselves the flexibility to think about capital structure in a much more tactical way. So for example, if the company has debt coming due in the next couple of quarters, they don't have to be dogmatically stuck to that framework. They could think about appropriately using their capital structure, whether it's refinancing debt, issuing debt, whatever the case may be. So I think it just gives them more flexibility and optionality. It doesn't change our view that they're going to buy back stock aggressively, and the company's still going to generate significant returns and cash flow going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the company's been a cash generating machine for years, but do you think this could also signal a move into higher business spend, potentially on AI or M&A? Is that something you're watching out for?
Yeah, M&A is probably a low priority opportunity for Apple. The biggest deal they've ever done in their history is the Beats deal many years ago. That was the predecessor to Apple Music. When you think about investing in AI, though, you could see it in the numbers today. They've spent a lot of money on R&D. So this quarter and the June quarter, for example, R&D spending is going to be up over 30% year over year. So that's where you're seeing the spend today. It's in the R&D line. CapEx and other investments, I think, are going to remain relatively modest compared to history. So the company is investing for the future, but just through the R&D line as we sit here today.
Got it. Well, strategically, what kind of AI investment should Apple be making right now? Is there anything more specific to say about that?
Yeah, look, they have the dominant edge AI platform potentially, right? There's over 1.5 billion iPhones in the installed base. So we think ultimately that's going to have a tremendous amount of value in the consumer's hand. The question I think most investors have and we have is what does that actually look like? So there's partnerships that they currently have in place with OpenAI. There's the expectation that the Gemini relationship will expand fairly meaningfully at the developer conference in June. It's still unclear what the consumer facing applications are outside of large language models that win. But given the installed base and Apple's engineering talent, we think they have a very good shot of being very successful. So TBD, but we'll know more at the developer conference in June.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could see so many potential applications for it. The other day, I was parking my car on the street and I looked at the parking sign. I said, I wish I could just get a notification on my phone when it's time for me to move my car, but Siri is not really equipped for that at
Not
this
quite
point.
there yet. Yeah,
Yeah,
not quite there yet.
but you see the potential for sure. Uh,
Exactly.
we got to talk about the leadership transition. So, how are you thinking about that? Are there things you think could change under John Turnus?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think John is going to be a capable leader. He's done an amazing job currently in his role within Apple. He's been a long time sort of engineering talent. I don't think much changes from the company's perspective, right? This is a company that is very thoughtful, very forward looking. They set plans out 1, 2, 3, 5 years in advance. So I think John will be a continuation of what Tim and the board of directors had put forth over the next couple of years. And remember, Tim will be with the company for quite some time. He's still not stepping down as CEO until September. He will be executive chairman. So I think the strategy is unchanged. I would also point to when they changed the CFO fairly recently, the system of financial controls, the communication from a financial perspective have not changed one bit under the new CFO, relatively new CFO. So I think we're going to see more of the same. Over the long term, does John want to put his, imprint on the business? Absolutely. It's a little bit too early to kind of make a speculative call on what that might be. So I think right now the status quo is probably the appropriate course of action for the company.
So you expect a lot of continuity. It's possible that in the long run he will have some different priorities. I mean, what else do we know about his differences in terms of personality or how he has helped run the company in the past?
Wow, that's a tough question. I would say engineering wise, he's a little bit different than Tim Cook, right? Tim is much more of an operational supply chain expert, and he was what the company needed at that point in time when Tim took over. And let's recall, Tim Cook has been the CEO for about 15 years now, so an incredibly long tenure and an incredibly successful tenure in that of itself. John is a little bit more of an engineering background person. So obviously he's been very heavy handed in sort of the product roadmap of the company. So we would expect to see more of that. But that's not to say that he doesn't have software ability and software expertise. So I think you're going to see kind of the same kind of view. I think John potentially is the right person at this time. We're going to give him a lot of rope to kind of take the company to the next level. But obviously, AI should be the real focus of what John and team are going to focus on. And we'll see how that develops over the next, call it 6 to 12 months.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, David. That was David Vogt from UBS. Elon Musk has been testifying this week in his legal battle against OpenAI, claiming that OpenAI breached a charitable trust by operating as a for profit instead of a nonprofit. I've been in the courtroom all week, and I want to bring on someone else who has been closely following the trial. That's Gary Marcus, NYU professor emeritus and author of Marcus on AI on Substack. Welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me. I was not in the courtroom like you, so I've only watched secondhand, but I've watched as closely as I can from second.
Yeah, it seems to me you've been following as closely as anyone. So we have to start by talking about the trial. We're 1 week in. You had a few takes on the trial that you published the other day, which is great. You're doing more than following. You have some serious opinions about what's going on. So can you walk us through these 3 takes of yours that you wrote?
I don't remember them numerically, but I guess the biggest take is that This trial is really about whether the company was founded as a nonprofit and what that means. But you also have Elon Musk in the room, and he will win the trial or might win the trial if he makes it about what OpenAI did. But if the trial becomes a referendum on Elon, he might lose the trial. And I'm afraid that from his perspective, his ego may be standing in the way of that. He should put himself less in the picture. It should really be about what Sam and Greg did, not what Elon did.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think OpenAI's lawyers are pretty good at getting under his skin, getting a rise out of him when he's being cross-examined on the stand. So you can imagine they're able to throw focus away from OpenAI's early history and paying more attention to Musk himself personally.
I mean, I think he's right that they're trying to trick him. I guess that's what their job is, right? And he's getting agitated by that, and that's calling more attention to him. I think the facts are the company was founded as a nonprofit for the benefit of humanity. I just read something that as recently as 2020, they were writing to Elon saying, "Can you give us money for the nonprofit?" They used that nonprofit status to recruit people. They got a tax exemption and so forth. That's what Elon should be talking about. Shouldn't so much be talking about himself and how he helped build it and so forth. That's not really relevant and not really helping him.
Is there anything that you're expecting to see next in the trial? For example, we haven't seen Altman testify yet. Are there arguments on OpenAI's side that you expect them to advance? What is OpenAI's case here?
Well, I mean, I can sort of speak from experience having testified next to Altman and having had Altman testify next to me at the US Senate in 2023 at the first AI Oversight Committee. And what I will tell you is that he is a master of projecting insincerity, a master at telling the room what it wants to hear, and not always truthful. And sometimes he can get fact checked in real time and sometimes not. So, for example, in what somebody the other day called the most important or famous lie in history, Altman, sitting right next to me, said that he had no equity in OpenAI. But in reality, he owned at that time a venture fund associated with OpenAI. He did all kinds of deals with companies that he owned with OpenAI. And he owned indirect equity in OpenAI through Y Combinator, which owned equity in OpenAI. And he didn't disclose any of that. And the senators were like, wow, you're doing this just for healthcare? And he let that slide and let a story go through that wasn't true. He also said that he supported artists getting compensation. And then he told, the British government, we shouldn't have to pay copyright for any of this stuff or pay licensing deals for any of this stuff. So, and he said he supported regulation. He said he supported my plans personally. And now he's, supporting lobbying against any regulation. So Altman will tell people what they want to hear. He will come off well, and it will be up to Musk's lawyers to come back on Altman and try to expose whatever might not be true.
Right. Well, it's a very adversarial environment to be testifying like that while you're being cross-examined, and the lawyers have access to all of his past statements, his deposition, and they can point out to him his past statements as well. I guess one of the ways that OpenAI might defend Altman from some of those claims is to say that even if Altman had a stake in some companies that did business with OpenAI, that those deals, those transactions were still in the best interests of OpenAI, that maybe they were done in an arm's length way, but there was no real conflict of interest at play. I imagine that's how.
I mean, if you believe that, I can find a bridge for you already installed. Goes from Manhattan to Brooklyn. It's really beautiful. It's built, over a century ago. It's a really great bridge. I've been on it many times. I like biking on it. Would you like to buy it? I'll give you a discount.
That's very kind of you. You've also said, you don't really like either side in this case, but you
I
think
don't.
Musk has a point. And that's a bit, I've heard that from a number of people. Can you explain that to us? Why don't you like either side? Why do you think Musk maybe?
I mean, I think they've both been dishonest. I think they've both traded on promises they don't really know how to deliver. I think, Elon, what he did with USAID alone, cost many lives. I really don't like him. I'll be honest about that. I don't like Altman either. I mean, he lied literally next to me, and he did it so effectively that I believed him at the time. I feel betrayed in a certain sense. I said a nice thing about him to the Senate, and I realized that in hindsight that he tricked me. I don't like that. So neither of these people are going to get Christmas presents from me. Let's be honest. But I call him like I see him. I've criticized Elon many times on Twitter, which he happens to own. I've criticized Altman many times, but I think right here, on substance, I can't really speak to the legal matters, but at least kind of to the spiritual question of, did OpenAI sell itself as a nonprofit for the public good and then change that? Well, clearly the answer to that is yes. And so, I understand why Elon is perturbed about that. I have to leave the legal questions about what one can do with a nonprofit legally and so forth, and what the nature of their contract was to other people. But in terms of the underlying question, did they take this nonprofit and turn it into a for-profit, exploiting a lot of people on the way in various ways, like people who went there to work for a nonprofit and then, wound up in this other thing. Um, I think there the matters are clear, and unfortunately, that leads me to kind of like sound like I'm an ally of Elon, so I certainly am not.
Sure. Well, you're not alone in your concerns about his political actions. I think a number of the members of the jury share those concerns, and they said so while they were being selected for the
They
jury.
should.
Some people had very vocal concerns and got weeded out, but ultimately people were able to say, I have concerns about his political actions, but I can set those aside. That we're focused on business here, not politics. So I think that's where they landed on that.
And if I can just drop in one thing, I actually wrote an open letter to Elon yesterday on Twitter, challenging him. So I'm not like all Elon all the way. I said, if you really care about AI safety, like you're telling this jury, then you need to tell the Trump administration to regulate AI. We're not going to have AI safety if AI is unregulated. So, I mean, even as people think, oh, here's Gary shilling for Elon, I'm challenging him, telling him he's not doing the right thing. So the reality is the world is complicated and different people have different positions on different things. Elon is right about the nonprofit, and he's wrong to no longer take AI safety as seriously as it once did.
Yeah, well, OpenAI's lawyer has really taken him to task over that. Musk is making these sweeping declarations that AI could kill everyone to the jury and to the judge, but then he can't answer some very basic questions about AI safety. He's unfamiliar with the
Yeah, that was
regulatory
embarrassing.
functions. Yeah.
Yeah, that embarrassing.
I agree.
He,
So when you say you're sort of rooting for Musk, it sounds like, not as a legal matter, but in terms of the spirit of the agreements as you understand them, you think he has.
I'm not rooting for Musk, just to be clear. I am rooting for the redress that he wants. He's not even in it for the money directly, although we could talk about his very complicated motives. But he wants the transition from nonprofit to profit to be voided. That is what I am rooting for. If OpenAI, I mean, just think about it in terms of global good rather than the law, which again, I'm not really speaking to. In global good, if OpenAI was a firm that was working as a nonprofit in the interest of humanity, they would do very different things than what they're doing right now. For example, their product has many negative consequences. There's non-consensual deepfake porn. Maybe that's them. Maybe that's not. Maybe that's not a perfect example. But there's delusions is a perfect example, right? There's been a bunch of cases of delusions that seem to be tied to their products, and they don't want liability for that. They're campaigning against liability. If they were really a nonprofit, they would say, hey, we've got a problem here. We should actually wind this down until this really is not causing serious harm to humanity, really is doing benefit for humanity. But instead, they're driving a race forward with products that are premature and unreliable and so forth. And so the world would certainly be better off if Elon got that part of it. I don't care about the money, like these guys are all rich or whatever. But I would like to see OpenAI forced to be the nonprofit benefiting humanity that it was built on, that it told California, and that it told the world and its recruits.
Got it. So you're saying, setting aside sort of the legal merits of the case, just in terms of the remedies you would like to see, your argument is you think the world would be better off if Musk gets some of the remedies he's asking for. And in particular, you have in mind unwinding the restructuring that OpenAI
Exactly.
last year?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the law actually supports that. That's not my bailiwick, but I know that the world would be better off if that happened.
I see. Well, it's certainly something that he's asking for in the case, in addition to a whole lot of money. And it's still unclear where that
the money would go to the nonprofit part that remains, not to his pocket, which is something I think people are not totally clear about. I mean, that's complicated because Elon would still stand to gain, right? Because he owns an AI company that competes with OpenAI. So even if he got not one nickel directly, he would indirectly benefit from that. And I don't think we should kid ourselves about that.
Right. That is what he's asking for, is he wants the money to come from the for-profit arm and go into the nonprofit arm.
That's right.
OpenAI has some questions about that. Certainly the judge has some questions
Sure
about that as well.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears here for a second. You also wrote this week about an incident where an AI agent deleted a company's code base. Can you give us a little rundown on what happened there in that incident? I don't think it's the first time we've heard of something
I think it was the database, not the code base, if we're
that's
talking about the same one. Um, I don't know of any incident where the whole code base has been deleted, but there have been actually multiple incidents where entire databases have been deleted. In this particular incident, the guy was a very, let's say, big fan of vibe coding, had some competence. He was not straight off the street, had some understanding of what's going on. And um, the system deleted his whole database. Eventually, though he doesn't say it in the main text, he was able to get the company that operated the database to retrieve a backup. But it initially looked like there was no backup at all. And, it's only probably because he had a tweet that was viewed by 20 million people that he was able to get it back. Like, I think the average person probably would have been stuck on customer service, which we all know is terrible these days. I have a tweet about that too, but we won't go there. So that side of it, what was most interesting to me is that it was a failure of guardrails. So like the system guardrails said, I believe, don't, delete databases or things to that effect. And certainly they should have, these kind of code agents. But the reality of LLMs is that they can't follow instructions very well. And that is a serious problem. That's why having automated agents is a dangerous thing. They can't really follow instructions. Earlier we saw, for example, Apple had in its news thing when they did quick headline, don't hallucinate. And then they got in trouble with the BBC because it was hallucinating anyway. It was there in the system prompt, don't hallucinate. But the reality is the language comprehension on these systems is limited and it failed. Here's another example. The agents are told, keep your code secure, don't delete stuff, but they don't really understand that. And so they're not really that reliable. So there actually been multiple incidents, but this one was particularly well documented. My tweet about it, I think, got like 2 million views or something like that. I think it was something like total disaster, totally predictable. It got 2.3 million views, I think, by last check. And that was about this particular incident, but it's not the only incident. And it was totally predictable. I did predict it. I wrote an essay in August after I went to the Black Hat conference and learned how serious all these problems were, and I'd written a little bit before. That was called Coding Agents Plus LLMs Equals Security Nightmare. And it is kind of a security nightmare. This one was not about security, but database existence at all. But it's just a complete mess. These systems are not reliable enough to chain them together to do these things without real expert oversight. And even there, the problem is that experts can tune out. So like with a driverless car, not a true driverless car, but a driver-assisted car, people tune out after a while. They trust the car, and that's when they get in trouble. And it's the same thing with these automated coding agents.
Right. I think we've seen that with dangerously skip permissions, which is the flag that you provide Claude Code to get it to just take actions autonomously. People get tired of just approve manually. They're gonna approve no matter what Claude is proposing. So at that point, they say, I might as well opt out of the loop. I guess you see this incident as kind of a failure of instruction following. It's that the model didn't sort of comprehend what the instructions were that it was giving.
Instruction following and also understanding the consequences of its actions, not really understanding that people might not want to have databases deleted, not really understanding that backups are always essential. I mean, stuff that a good engineer would know, it's just not really doing.
I mean, these sound like capabilities issues. Do you expect that these issues will get resolved just naturally with scaling as the models improve?
Well, you're a younger man. You'll see that. I mean, it will happen eventually. It might happen in the next several years. They're obviously actively working on it. But the problem is at the core, you have an LLM. What we're moving to now is actually what I've argued for, which is neurosymbolic AI, where you have LLMs and some symbolic code. But the way they're doing it is still a mess. And I don't think anybody has a good principled way to do it. And I think we actually have to work on our reasoning has to be much better. The system actually has to build a world model of what the user is trying to do, which I think is a very hard question. We will see steady progress, but whether we get to the point where I would say the average person can really do what they want without writing a line of code, trusting these systems, whether that happens anytime soon, I would say probably not.
I see. And you think the stakes are pretty high here. I mean, you wrote in your post, I have it here, you wrote, in this case, the user just lost data. Eventually, people will lose their lives. Can you draw the connection for us there?
Yeah. And actually goes back, it's very important. I'm glad you asked that. And it goes back to something I said about Elon and AI safety, right? The problem is that people are putting more and more on these systems. So, people used to just like, I don't know, use spam filters. And if something got, that was a use of AI. And if something got through, it wasn't the end of the world. But when you're hooking up AI to weapon systems, which is happening now, or when you're hooking up to power grids, which is happening now, and so forth, if they make a mistake because they don't really understand what they're doing, they're really just mimics, that mistake can be really costly. There's also, I think, a lot of scenarios where we might get to accidental nuclear war or something like that because we get an armed conflict that comes either from AI generated misinformation or mistargeting from a system, and people get mad and then things escalate and so forth. There are actually a lot of avenues, I think, whereby things might go pretty wrong. Not as wrong, by the way, as Elon is talking about. I don't think a literal extinction is that plausible when you think about how geographically diverse humans are, how genetically diverse we are. I mean, COVID only killed 1% of the population. It was an absolutely horrible thing. Literal extinction is probably not a problem, but nuclear war wouldn't be literal extinction, but it would be really, really bad. And I can see all kinds of scenarios where we get escalations of war out of using unreliable systems without enough oversight and so forth.
I see. And you're picturing there something more along the lines of accidents and unreliability than someone maliciously using the
Oh,
system.
I left something out. Yes. Malice is another serious problem, right? So I'm not so worried. Sorry, I should say that more clearly. I'm not so worried about machines having intentions. I think everything that looks like a machine having intention, at least so far, is just a machine mimicking something it read on Reddit or in a science fiction story or whatever. It doesn't actually have intention. But a malicious human, yeah, we should be really terrified about what malicious humans can do. I mean, they're already, for example, creating these swarms of misinformation bots to create like apparent whole communities believing things that don't actually exist and stuff like that. And so, one of my nightmare scenarios is somebody decides they want to make a killing on the market. The obvious way to do that is to short the market by causing chaos in the world. That's going to get increasingly easy. Somebody's probably going to try to do that, and that's not going to be good.
I'm sure we could talk a lot more about this, but before we run out of time, I have to ask you about the goblins. I feel like the goblins have been the talk of the town this week. Have you been following this, that OpenAI's
I,
models have an affinity for goblins?
well, it reminds me of this. I haven't actually followed it in detail, but it reminds me of this thing a few years ago about solid gold magic carp. Do you remember
Yeah,
that one?
I
It's
do.
like magic word that would cause chaos. And there's an academic paper that just came out about them preferring nonsense to reality and so forth. You have to remember that these large language models are not people; they just mimic people, and they can do some really baffling things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. The solid gold Magikarp reference, as I understanding, is this was maybe the most famous of the glitch tokens that were discovered. This is something that the model sees as a single word because it encountered it somewhere on some remote corner of the internet, but it's sort of a nonsense word. And so when you present the model with that word, it's sort of a magic password. It elicits some very bizarre behavior. I actually just saw the movie Eddington. I don't know if you saw that. It's sort of
I haven't seen.
about the COVID-19. Well, the data center company is called Solid Gold Magikarp in the movie, which I thought was a nice little Easter egg.
That's hilarious. That's a nice Easter egg.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Gary. Really appreciate your thoughts on all of these matters of
Maybe
AI.
I could come back, closer to the end of the trial. We can see where all
That
this
would be
like.
great. Yeah, we can break everything down. All right. Have a
That'd be
great
great.
Friday.
This was really fun. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Take care. Up next, Shopify is making a bigger push into financial services, according to exclusive reporting from our e-commerce reporter, Ann Guillen. The commerce giant has obtained money transmitter licenses in more than a dozen US states and is seeking them nationwide. On this week's edition of The Editor's Cut, we discuss how companies are trying to own more of the payment stack themselves. I'm joined now by senior editor Meredith Mazzilli. Welcome.
Hey, Rocket, how's it going?
Going good. How are you?
Doing great.
Well, let's get started. What are these licenses that Shopify is after?
Sure. So this is a really interesting development that us editors have been keeping tabs on. I think first helpful to just explain what Shopify is and then dive into the licenses. So Shopify might not be the biggest household name, but it powers millions of online shops around the internet with its commerce software. But it is also a big payments provider. It provides payments and financial services for all those billions of dollars a year that are running through those individual shops collectively. So the licenses that it's applying for are really interesting because basically, very high level, it's seeking permission to be able to do more with the moving of the money on behalf of other people, other businesses itself, and also hold those funds more directly. An easy way to think about it might be like, how Venmo will hold your funds in an account. Somebody pays you, you can kind of keep that money, pay somebody else later on. That's also kind of part of what they're trying to do, but potentially more on the merchant side. So the big picture takeaway there is Shopify is seeking these regulatory approvals to be able to push deeper into having more control over those billions of dollars flowing through its shops each year.
As you've been following this space, I mean, is that a no-brainer? Did we see this coming? Was it just a matter of time until they did
Uh,
this?
well, I will say Shopify's payments business itself is huge and has been fast growing. Just in sheer revenue terms, it is much bigger than the core software business, but is much lower margin. The curious question is, why are they doing this now? And I think that is what is the most interesting part of this, right? So I think right now it's a no-brainer for a few reasons. It makes Shopify more central to how merchants run on their business. Now that it's gotten so bigger in payments, it can also offer more add-on services and push deeper into, accounts, merchant account management, other things maybe we're not even thinking of. And Shopify is telling this is kind of the next logical step now that they've established this big payments business to take that to the next level.
Is it difficult to get these licenses? Is that one thing that's been holding them back? And does it seem likely that, so they have them in some states, but they're trying to get them nationally?
So it is not just filling paperwork. It definitely is a regulatory lift. I will say it does seem like they do have a lot of compliance staff in place to begin the licensing process. So there's people you need to even begin considering doing this. And they have progressed along at a pretty nice clip. I believe they started applying last year. Some of the outstanding states are some of the ones that are just tougher. So New York, California, where it's just for anybody, it's just probably going to take a little bit of time. And then again, it's not just paperwork. And once you get it, it's not just like, okay, you're great forever. There is a lot of ongoing compliance work around knowing their customers, preventing money laundering, things like in-person exams in some states that they will need to continue to work on and continue staffing for.
Okay, so a big regulatory lift for sure. What does this mean for Shopify's relationship with Stripe?
So at this point, it is not a Stripe breakup story. The companies go back a long time, and Shopify has been a significant source of payment revenue going into Stripe. And, Stripe kind of behind the scenes is the one doing the real heavy lifting on the processing. They'll take fees for that. So the way it's looking now, it's not going to be, any big shift in that. More likely, it's going to be just giving Shopify more flexibility and more direct control over those funds and just more optionality and leverage with its partners.
Okay, but they're not trying to be totally self-sufficient or independent from Stripe, at least at this point.
And that would be a big jump in any case, yeah.
Got it. Well, does this already mark kind of a shift for Shopify? Are they a fintech at this point?
So I wouldn't call them a fintech first. I would think of them more as a merchant platform with a big and continuously growing financial operation attached. But the leading piece of that and the reason why they have all those payment flows is the merchant part of it, is kind of like the shops and things like that where the money is coming in. How that balance continues to shift, I think, is really interesting. A few years back now, Shopify did try to build an entirely new business in the form of logistics. We reported that this is a few years back again. They kind of backed away from that really quickly. They sold off that division. So I think there is an argument there that Shopify, kind of needs another third pillar, so to speak. So financial services beyond payments is one way they could build that up.
Got it. And I guess, yeah, there's the regulatory reason, all the paperwork. That's a reason for them not to do this. Are there other risks that Shopify takes on by taking this new role?
Yeah, I mean, the regulatory risk is ongoing, just there is ongoing compliance. And there's also just merchants really care about their money, obviously, and getting paid out on time. Consumers care about things working seamlessly when it comes to e-commerce. So there's also just that risk of like making sure everything works at a huge scale operationally before, completely pivoting or taking on more of a certain aspect of this yourself.
So there are more people that could get mad at you for
Essentially, and yeah, yeah,
okay. People have higher expectations, I guess.
yeah.
Um, does this story, just sort of pulling back, I mean, does this story bring anything up for you in terms of where the industry is headed, where fintech is headed?
Yeah, there's a few big things going on here, and I think something us editors will continue to track and think about. So the first is there's just this bigger shift that's been going on for a while now in fintech and software, where you're seeing similar blurring of the lines. Consumers or companies that are using a software platform, various companies trying to embed financial services deeper into that, which makes sense. Like with e-commerce, the money you're doing the spending online, why not tie that more closely together? And then another wild card that's come up again over the past couple of days, even, is the role of PayPal in the broader payments ecosystem. This was actually right after we published our story. So PayPal, for a while now, has been discussed as a potential M&A target. And then earlier this week, they also reorganized to basically make cleaner breaks between their different divisions. So they have Braintree, which is their kind of behind the scenes payment processing. They have Venmo, which is now more cleanly separated into a different organization. So where I'm going with that is this: PayPal is in play and potentially pieces of PayPal are in play. And it's quite possible that, with that potential M&A activity, different, be it payments competitors, other parts of the ecosystem, pick up pieces of PayPal. And I think it's just interesting to keep an eye on what Shopify is up to, because I think regardless, these licenses give them a lot more flexibility and optionality. If PayPal consolidates with another payments player, for instance, that does kind of take away a source of leverage in the market, just fewer competitors.
I see. Now, you wouldn't expect Shopify itself to buy a piece of PayPal, or would you?
I don't want to make a prediction there. I think that would be fun. But I will say both companies are reporting earnings next week. So, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on how this all plays out.
Well, we'll look forward to that. So thanks so much, Meredith. That
Yeah.
was Meredith Mazzilli, senior editor at The Information. Well, that does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it then, episodes are available on theinformation.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on social media on X, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm already excited for our next show, and have a great rest of your Friday. Goodbye for now.